All right. So one of the top teams from China has done it again. Rare and his gang are back with 4 DPS, and they actually are able to time an Everbloom 31. And I'm sure that you're aware, since I'm bringing you this video, there's a lot of this that we're going to take a look at, and we're going to kind of talk about how they're 4 DPSing it, what they're 4 DPSing it as. I also have the route. We can kind of show off some of just the route in general and kind of look at what they were doing. Everbloom, though, is a very hard key to time on a 31. This is the first 31 that we've seen timed, which is why this is super impressive. If you tend to look at statistics-driven data, Everbloom tends to be towards the bottom. It depends on kind of like the week as to how close to the bottom it realistically is. But in general, Everbloom has a lot of hard bosses and a decent amount of very difficult trash pulls, which is why whenever I saw that Rare was playing 4 DPS in this key, I was a bit surprised at the fact that he was able to live a lot of the trash pulls. There's a lot of these pulls in this dungeon that just kind of beat up your tank. Even like the lashers themselves, if you don't have a lot of clears for that lasher debuff, obviously he does have Vengeful Retreat, but not having a lot of clears for the lasher debuff makes it very hard, especially whenever you're 4 DPSing it, because then you're not getting pain suppression and whatnot. They're almost fully reliant on things like Nature's Vigil and Vamp Embrace to kind of keep them up. Now, the reason that this shows as 4 DPS is kind of like what we talked about in the Ataldazar, is because they zone into the key as 4 DPS. Their healer is the Disc Priest in this, it typically plays Disc Priest. However, they're playing Shadow for the first, and in this instance, it was the first 3 minutes of Ataldazar. In this case, it's 10 minutes here. They play through the first boss. And basically, the first pull is a more conservative left pull approach because they don't have a healer. Typically, whenever you play a composition that's like this on live, you're going to do a much larger right side pull. And whenever you're doing a much larger right side pull, you're going to be able to, pop your lust. You're going to be able to kill off an abomination. There's no killing an A-bomb with 4 DPS. You're not going to be able to heal through it. And so instead, they're playing a really conservative route because they know their damage is going to be high enough. But because they know their damage is going to be high enough, they're able to pull, more conservatively. Basically, Rare is pulling the most mobs that he can live. There's also stingers in these pulls, but we have 2 poison dispels, and so it's not like the end of the world if we have a couple of stingers, but we need to really make sure that we're pulling around our Vamp Embrace and our Nature's Vigil to be able to keep people topped up. Obviously, the Mage and the Augurvoke are going to have a pretty easy time of healing themselves, though. And so now we're going to make it into the Witherbark room. Again, we're still playing DPS. Our Priest has not zoned out yet to swap from Shadow to Disc. Instead, they are playing, again, through Witherbark with this DPS composition. They're also going to have to grab one of these stingers out of the sky and pull it into Witherbark at some point. But one of the advantages of 4 DPSing this as well is Witherbark dies rather quickly. So it's pretty challenging on Fortified to actually 2-phase Witherbark, but whenever you're playing 4 DPS, that damage check becomes a lot less of a thing, where you're able to actually 2-phase this boss just with 4 DPS. And you see it on screen right here. They're going to get the first phase, and I think the boss is like 52%. They're going to get the boss to, I want to say it's 42 before the second phase starts. And then from there on, they're going to be able to just kind of push the boss into the phase. Rare being able to live is probably the most surprising part of this entire run. I suspect that this took a lot of practice on his end to be able to not die just to these lashers. And I feel like this is an incredibly well-crafted route. Additionally, being able to grab the stinger into the boss, this boss does 0 DPS to your group if played well. The circles on the ground, they will sometimes creep up on you and hit you. Additionally, the vines can do damage to you. But beyond that, again, this fight does no damage that's not just meleeing on the tank. So that's why you're able to see things like the stingers brought into this, and obviously no healer. Now, you might ask where the teams are going to be lusting. They're playing a 3 lust approach to this dungeon because the second boss is actually incredibly challenging. So after the first boss dies, the Priest is going to zone out. They're going to port out. They're going to swap to Disc. Meanwhile, Rare is going to be setting up their pull that's dealt with after this boss. They're playing a 0 A-bomb route. I think at a 31 Fortified, it makes sense to play a 0 A-bomb route. Typically, whenever you're playing an Abomination, even on like 30 Fortified, it's going to have to be with Lust, especially with this composition. But they're not wanting to Lust it because they need to Lust Ancients, because this comp is really, really bad at Ancients, and so having a Lust for it is nice because they basically have no kicks, right? You have Augurvoker kick, you have Balancer kick, which is on 60-second CD. Disc doesn't have a kick. Sure, you can get a few more kicks whenever you're shifting your mage's kick CD, but we're gonna have to kill Ancients rather quick, otherwise we're gonna be in a lot of trouble. And so that's why they're going with 3 less strat because Moonkin very bad at living that fight because it drags it out for so long and not having kicks, but it does kill it off rather quickly, as you can see right here, doing just an insane amount of DPS. And frankly, as well, once Telu goes down, it's not like a huge deal. In addition to that, something that we hadn't really talked about, which is kind of important, is their mage also swapped to Arcane. Now, Arcane is actually quite good for Mass Barrier on the third boss, and on the second boss is actually very good because you also get a additional 15% damage reduction versus magic style effects. On top of that, I think a lot of it comes down to killing the Flourishing Ancient on the final boss, because that's going to be their big limiting factor, especially in the 31, is having enough damage to be able to kill it off. So their mage also zoned out and went Arcane. And so I think that makes sense. So they kill off the boss, then they were able to, not wipe to the trash pack in front of the council, or in front of Archmage Soul. Then they take, and you can kind of see how I have it routed here, they take all of the Hapless Assistants and this Arcanomancer into Archmage Soul. Assuming that you don't let a kick go off, this is a very, very fast pull. There is a lot of danger in this pull, and as you can see right here, we're having a couple of deaths. We do get everybody res back up with Engineering Bracers, but if you ever have a mistake, it can kind of cascade out of control rather quickly, and so you have to really be worried about that. And then beyond that, again, with the 3 lust strat, our final lust is going to be on Yalnu. That allows you to just overall get less Flourishing Ancient casts in those mobs coming out. But in reality, we're making sure that we are saving all of our damage, Touch of the Magi, any Shadow Crashes, Primordial Arcanic Pulsar procs for these Flourishing Ancients, and trying to get them killed off every single time, because we know that we're going to be a minute and a half under. With the 4 DPS composition at the very beginning, they killed the first boss at 10 minutes. They killed the second boss at 7:15. So they were on pace to be about 2:30 under. Now, they did have a couple of deaths on Archmage Soul, which is what stalled them out. But they basically knew that, assuming that they were able to kill off all the Flourishing Ancients, it didn't really matter. So they knew that they could play conservative with their damage, right? Where they would just literally pump everything straight into the ad. Don't really worry too much about boss damage. The boss damage will be there, assuming that we're not going to wipe. And they pull it off. And they're able to time the first 31 Everbloom of the season. They played without a healer for the first 10 minutes before people were zoning out. I tweeted about this the other day. I don't really like the concept of people zoning out of every single key. It feels like over half the keys this season, about 6 of them, honestly, people are zoning out of. Both the Dawns, both like a Taldazar, people are zoning out of. People are porting out of Darkheart Thicket. People are porting out of Blackrock Hold. People are zoning out of Everbloom. It just feels like it's way too much. That's kind of my thoughts on it. But nonetheless, this doesn't take away from the fact that these guys timed the first 31 Everbloom in the world. They did it with 4 DPS for a large portion of it. And I mean, if you look at overall damage as well, their priest ended at 410,000 DPS overall for the entire key, which is an absolutely crazy number whenever you consider them to be a healer, right? If your healer ends over like 130, you're like, wow, that was a great healer day. Now, if your healer ends at 410, that's a DPS, right? And that's how they saved so much time. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts down in the comment section below. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.